Looking for a fast-charging, ultra-responsive stylus for your iPad? Meet the 2X Fast Charge Active Stylus Pen, designed for 2018 to 2025 Apple iPads. Take your creativity and productivity to the next level. Click the link in the video description to shop now on Amazon.
J.D. Vance's mad life before politics, scary relatives, white trash friends, and drugs at 12. All eyes are on J.D. Vance after he was forced to deny grievously insulting Britain by claiming a potential peacekeeping force in Ukraine would be 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. The U.S. vice president claimed he had been misquoted when he was accused of disrespecting British forces who served alongside the U.S. in Iraq and Afghanistan, with former Veterans Minister Johnny Mercer branding him a clown who needs to check his privilege. But who is Vance? Where does he come from, and what lies at the heart of his character? Fortunately, there are plenty of answers in his best-selling 2006 memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, about the Appalachian values of chaotic Kentucky family and the socioeconomic problems of his hometown of Middletown, Ohio. He's a master of the humble brag. It's known as a humble brag when you make seemingly modest, self-critical statements that in fact draw attention to your qualities, and J.D. Vance is a master at it. I'm 31 years old, and I'll be the first to admit that I've accomplished nothing great in my life, he tells readers modestly in the introduction. Certainly nothing that would justify a complete stranger paying money to read about it. Why are we expected to pay to read it then? Don't worry, he soon has the answer. Vance tells us he wrote his memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, not because he'd accomplished something extraordinary, but because he's achieved something quite ordinary, which doesn't happen to most kids who grew up like me. He continues, I grew up poor, in the Rust Belt, in an Ohio steel town that had been hemorrhaging jobs and hope for as long as I remember. I have, to put it mildly, a complex relationship with my parents, one of whom has struggled with addiction for nearly my entire life. Kids like him, poor with no father on the scene and a chaotic, drug-addicted mother, face a grim future, he warns. If they're lucky, they'll manage to avoid welfare, and if they're unlucky, they'll die of a heroin overdose. Fortunately, Vance has been more than lucky. Today people look at me, at my job and my Ivy League credentials, and assume that I'm some sort of genius, that only a truly extraordinary person could have made it to where I am today. He describes that as bull, but really, it's clear his escape from his impoverished hillbilly background, as he tells it, is pretty incredible. He is obsessed with father figures. Vance's mother, Bev, fell pregnant at 18 with his older half-sister, Lindsay, married swiftly and was soon divorced and a single mom. Vance, 40, was born in Middletown, Ohio, on August 2, 1984, to Bev and another man, Donald Bowman. He left soon afterwards. Dad gave me up for adoption when I was 6, he writes, and Vance grew up trying to get on with a succession of his mother's boyfriends. With them, he pretended to enjoy their interests, but admits it was an act. His happiest times came when he stayed with his maternal grandparents. Home was with his grandparents, Mama, pronounced Mama, and Papa, Bonnie Blanton and Jim Vance in Jackson, Kentucky, in the heart of Kentucky coal country. Even as he lived in a succession of addresses with different men with his mother. Until he was 12, he spent his summers in the city of Jackson in Breathitt County, Kentucky. There he worshipped his uncles, in fact his grandmother's brothers. Nearly everyone in his memoir is deeply flawed, while some have tried to murder other people and a few were successful. Some have abused their children, physically or emotionally. Many abused and still abuse drugs, but I love these people, even those to whom I avoid speaking for my own sanity. One uncle smoked weed with him when he was 12, but they were father figures nonetheless. His uncles were also the gatekeepers to the family's oral tradition. He loved their stories, although they were mostly far from child-appropriate, like the time one uncle made his sister's erstwhile suitor eat her underwear at knife point. Such stories made Vance feel like hillbilly royalty. The uncles were the chaotic enforcers of hillbilly justice. They were classic good versus evil stories, and my people were on the right side. Hardly surprising he is now enthralled to Donald Trump, you might think. We use your sign-up to provide content in ways you've consented to and to improve our understanding of you. This may include adverts from us and third parties based on our understanding. You can unsubscribe at any time. Read our privacy policy. He has a giant downer on his family background in the Appalachian Mountains. Vance was largely raised by his grandparents, neither of whom graduated high school, while few members of his extended family attended college. He wants readers to know how it feels to nearly give up on yourself and why you might do this. What happens in the lives of the poor and the psychological impact that spiritual and material poverty has on their children. Yet for all his lived experience, he has little sympathy with the hillbillies of the Appalachian Mountains among whose stock he counts himself. For those of us lucky enough to live the American dream, the demons of the life we left behind continue to chase us, he admits. Vance tells us that he identifies with working-class white Americans of Scots-Irish descent who have no college degree. To these folks, poverty is the family tradition. His family is from the hills of eastern Kentucky. Such people have become prey to low social mobility, poverty, divorce, and drug addiction. My home is a hub of misery, he admits. Surveys have found such white working-class men more pessimistic than Black Americans. They fail to relocate for work and have dropped out of the labor force. Americans call them hillbillies, rednecks, or white trash. I call them neighbors, friends, and family, he writes. Yet it's not just that the jobs have left them, they have left work. Vance writes that he desperately wanted to believe this himself, but experience can be a difficult teacher. Working in a tile warehouse as a young man, he recalls people who didn't want to work, turned up late, were unreliable, took too many breaks, and got fired despite, in one case, having a pregnant girlfriend to support, before blaming the employer. Too many young men are immune to hard work. Good jobs are impossible to fill for any length of time, Vance explains. What is wrong is a culture that increasingly encourages social decay instead of counteracting it. There's a lack of agency here, a feeling that you have little control over your life and a willingness to blame everybody but yourself. Loyalty is important. He writes warmly of his maternal grandparents. In Jackson, I was the grandson of the toughest woman anyone knew and the most skilled auto mechanic in town. In Ohio, I was the abandoned son of a man I hardly knew and a woman I wished I didn't. Mama had nearly killed a man when she was just 12 for trying to steal the family cow, a prized possession in a world without running water. Having winged one of the thieves, she prepared to finish him off before being stopped by one of her brothers. Mama's first confirmed kill would have to wait for another day, writes Vance. Yet his grandmother, who had given birth to and buried a child before she could legally drive a car and never spent a day in high school, and grandfather, a violent, antisocial, and chaotic drunk before he eventually quit drinking, spent the last 2 decades of their lives showing me the value of love and stability. Despite this, he also reveals how his Uncle Jimmy told him of his grandparents. Like everyone else in our family, they could go from zero to murderous in a ing heartbeat. Violence and chaos were an ever-present part of the world that I grew up in, he has said. Today, the Appalachian Mountains are a hotbed of poverty and prescription drug abuse. Hillbillies learn to deal with uncomfortable truths, like Mountain Dew mouth, as the epidemic of childhood dental problems caused by sugary drinks is called, by avoiding them and living in violent denial when they sense they are being criticized. How this plays to his idea of loyalty is anyone's guess, but there are echoes of mafia-like willingness of the hillbilly community to close ranks against outsiders and come out fighting when under fire. Again, something we have seen in the Trump White House.